Live streaming for you need to wait 24 hours before you can start your first live
And
stream.
an Android of 5 plus device.
Mhm.
So I did verify my channel too, but turn on the live streaming. Yeah, I just didn't notice after like 24, after the 15 I mean, I have to wait 24 hours. Okay, hopefully for next week I can do it. Anyways, thank you so much. Okay, so we are a representative democracy in the United States. We do have one country in the world that they have pure democracy. So the second one is pure, meaning all pure or a direct, either pure or direct democracy. Meaning people vote just like how our representatives in Congress, they vote for the law to pass. Citizens of the country do it. Which country, can anyone guess which country still has, there's one country in the world that has still pure democracy or direct democracy?
What do you mean with direct democracy?
They actually, we vote, elect basically our representatives, congressmen, senators, right? They go to Congress, they pass law for us. You and I don't pass law, right? But for that country, that's what we're representative democracy. For them, which is direct democracy, those laws are on the ballot. Like for us, sometimes we say, for example, abortion law or recreational drugs, right? And then we pass the law. For them, but that only happens very few times in state level, which is local government. But for this country, they do the same thing all the time in national level. So they put the law on the ballot, people vote for that. So anybody has any idea which country?
Switzerland.
Switzerland. Who said that? Did you search online or no?
Yeah.
Yeah. You searched it. So yeah, it's actually Switzerland. I was gonna give you guys hints like it's in Europe and all that. So it is Switzerland. How does it start? Is that it started with Roman Empire time when citizens went to Colosseum. They gathered around together to decide what do we do for the city or for the township or for people, for the community. So the culture started from that time. But a lot of countries later changed, and we changed to representative democracy, which means like, you don't know enough, we're gonna vote, somebody else will pass the law for us. But Switzerland didn't change it, so they kept their own pure democracy. They put all the laws on the ballot and people passed the law. Now, the other thing about Switzerland that they have is that they do have Congress like what we do, like we call it House and Senate, they call it lower house or upper house. We have states that we elect our representatives, they have cantons they call it. But they have those people in the Congress, they select 6 people from the Congress and they call them presidents. So they never have one president, they always have 6 presidents at a time. Because they do not believe that one person should be allowed to decide for the whole nation. So those 6 people always, for decision making, they always together make a decision as a collaboration. But in international events, once a year they rotate, and basically each of them represent Switzerland in international events a year, and then next year someone else from the 6 people will represent Switzerland in international events. But as far as decision making, must be all 6 at the same time present to make a decision. So that's why it is a pure democracy. Then we have totalitarian regimes, which we have 4 types of totalitarian regimes. 4 types. First of all, the number 1 is communism or left wing. We have fascism or right wing. We have tribalism and we have theocratic regimes. So, communism or left wing, fascism or right wing, tribalism, and theocratic regimes. All of these, they have one similarity, and that is no voting system. No election, no voting. It's all one person rule, which is leader. Usually it's not president because you don't elect them, right? So it's usually the leader. Now let's just start with communism. Communism started, actually the idea of communism started in 1917. It was successful in 1917 by Bolshevik revolution in Soviet Union. The idea started because the gap between poor and rich was huge at that time in that part of the world. In most of part of the world, because after Industrial Revolution, people who owned businesses or small manufacturers, factories, they became very rich, and others, they stayed peasants. So that's why the gap widened, and in that part of the world, so former Soviet Union, they wanted to have communism, which was equality. That was the ideology to begin with. So everybody has to have everything equally distributed to them, which we call it left wing, far left. Then right wing came around 30s, which was in Hitler in Germany, Mussolini in Italy, Franco in Spain. In 30s, they came around with fascism. They wanted to be exactly opposite left wing, so they wanted to be right wing fascism because they didn't like it. But in reality, it's the same thing because it's again one man rule. One person needs to rule it. But there was a little difference in how to run the businesses in the country or economy. Left wing never allows any businesses to be owned. All businesses are owned by government, okay? All lands, businesses. So they said, fascism said, people can actually own businesses, but it has to be small businesses. It was not like you can own multinational corporations or something like that. So government has to have basically control over that. That's why they did allow to some certain level, but small to medium-sized businesses. But again, in reality, they're all part of totalitarian regimes. Then we have, so let me just write it down here. An example for communism, do we have an example of communism right now around the world?
North Korea.
North Korea, exactly. We have North Korea. Russia, actually, very good point. Russia, as a matter of fact, but who said Russia? As a definition, if you go by definition, it's a representative democracy because they vote. Iran, too, it's a representative democracy. But we know that it's not true, right? But it's just definition because people go and vote. I mean, how much of it is true and how much of it is really based on what people want, that's up to them. But just because they go and vote, so it falls under this. But North Korea, they don't. So therefore, it's absolute communism and totalitarian. Now, examples for right wing used to be, as I said, in 1930s, Germany, Italy, for example, Spain, back then. Now, tribalism. Tribalism, it's based on tribes. Mostly we talked about it first session that happens in Africa. When one tribe takes over, they usually basically combat or massacre the other tribe. And then when this tribe takes over, not by voting, by election or anything, just by civil war, they take over and then they will massacre the other tribe. This happened, I gave you guys example, Rwanda in 1993, it happened when they killed 800,000 people in 6 months, which it was 1/3 of the country's population. So 1/3 of the country's population was massacred. So this was mostly happens in Africa, 1990s in Rwanda it happened. Then we have theocratic regimes. The theocratic regimes, they go based on theocracy, based on the Holy Book. Countries that are operating, their countries like that are Saudi Arabia and United Arab Emirates. Any question about this? The other countries can fall here. Now, where is China here? communism, exactly. China is here actually. China is communism. In the past, we used to, okay, let's see, this is economic, let's say, systems, right? One side we have open market or market economy. And then the other side we have closed market or command economy. And in the middle we have mixed economy. Oh, this is locked up. Okay, sorry. Okay, so one more time. We have open economy or market economy, open market or market economy, closed market or command economy, and mixed market. This side is usually capitalism and the other side communism. It used to be like this in the past, but China showed it could be different too, because China actually is practicing left wing or communism as far as political system, but the economic system is actually opening up. It's going towards here. So these days are different. In 1960s, 70s, yes, it would be the same. But right now, they're opening their economy, but their system is still the same political communist system. Now, let's talk about here. Here, let's say it's 100% open economy. Where do you think in this chart United States is?
Next.
Which one? Who said that? Sorry.
Next.
No.
It's an open market.
It's an open market, but it's not 100% open. We're somewhere here, let's say. Now, we don't have 100% open market anymore. We did have before Industrial Revolution and before governments start enforcing or putting rules and regulations. When we say open market, that means, it's a French terminology, it's laissez-faire. Laissez-faire means hands off, and they're referring to government hands off. Hey, government, takes your hands off of my business. That's what they used to say. So that's what government didn't have any say at all on the businesses. No rules, no policies, no regulations. But after Industrial Revolution, the gap actually widened. The gap was huge because people, as we just said about Russia, factory owners, they could make a lot of money, but they could hire actually people, child labor. They could hire for 1 cent. They could actually give them a meal instead of wages, right? Because there was no regulations. Then governments noticed, no, that's not going to happen. It's not going well. So let's enforce some regulation. As soon as government starts putting, governments around the world, they started putting some regulation, it takes away from 100% free. Because there's some regulation, so you're not free. You have to listen to some, follow some policies. For example, no child labor, minimum wage, taxes you have to pay, workers' compensation you have to pay. We have tariffs, like we talked about it when you go to Mexico, when you're bringing back cigarettes, you have to pay taxes. So those are all regulations that government put for us. As soon as our governments put regulations for us, takes us away from 100% open market. So therefore, we are somewhat around here. We are actually one of the most open markets in the world, but not on the top 4 or 5 ones. We do have a couple markets that are the most open as of now around the world. Again, doesn't mean they're 100% open. Can anybody guess one of those countries that is very open as far as doing business in?
China?
No.
South Korea.
Those are very good examples. China and South Korea are good examples, but they're all probably around somewhere here. South Korea a little bit here, China a little bit here, but no. It's actually, one of them is Hong Kong. It's not a country though, it's a region. New Zealand, Singapore, and Switzerland. 4 countries that are more open, 3 countries in the region that are more open than others. And we are here. One thing, when you go towards open economy, businesses are owned by private sector. Oh, it's locked again. Sorry. Oh, it still records? Oh, okay. So don't worry about it then. And you don't need to worry about it. So when you go towards the open market, businesses are owned by private sector. When you move towards closed market, businesses are owned by public sector, which means by government. People don't. So, for example, what is a very good example of closed market? Almost 100% closed market right now around the world. It's the same example we said here. North Korea. So nothing is owned by people, by citizens of North Korea. Everything is owned by public sector, which is government. Lands, housing units, businesses, everything. Just like a business that a manager makes decisions like how many units we need to produce, who do we buy it from, who's our supplier, how much do we have to sell it for, what is the cost of production. All of those decisions comes from the command system, which is the command economy, comes from the office of the leader and the consultants, basically. So advisors, that's it. So everything is owned 100% by government. Now, we are here, we do have mixed economies. Mixed economies are actually economies that do have a healthy, basically, sector owned by, healthy industries owned by private sector, and then also owned by public sector as well. Both are involved. Well, in the United States, our government owns a lot of businesses as well as investments, but the government competes with public sector. Here, some businesses, some industries, private sector are not allowed to own those businesses because it's only for public sector, for government. And that is a very good example is Sweden. Now, in Sweden, for example, you cannot own healthcare system. How here we have healthcare system, health insurance, and all that. All of those are subsidized by government and it's owned by government. So government, they have like public hospitals, and everybody's paid by government subsidies. They're subsidized for people. Very good examples are actually healthcare industry and prison industry. Here we have a lot of private prisons as well, right? We have public prisons, but we have private prisons too. But over there, you cannot own private prisons. Anything that is dealt with quality of life, standard of life, you cannot own actually make a profit out of it as a private citizen. Government has to control that. So that's why those education, mostly owned by government. There are private schools too, but they're so rare. Like people mostly go to public universities or schools. So these 3 types are the major 3 types, and then countries can fall anywhere between all these different systems. Okay? Now, any question about economy before I move to legal system? Okay, so for legal systems, we do have, let's see, we have this is the legal system. We have 3 types of legal systems. We have civil law, we have common law, and we have theocratic. So which one is United States? No, actually, is common law. United States is common law. This is US, UK. It started with British Empire and all the colonies of UK, which includes us too, right? Now, civil law it started with Roman Empire and then Napoleon and all the colonies of France, Portugal, Spain, all those countries, and their colonies are still using civil law. Then we have theocratic legal system, which goes based on Holy Book. For example, we said theocratic regimes are authoritarian regimes such as United Arab Emirates and Saudi Arabia. But when we talk about legal system, you can include Iran in it too. Because as we said, Iran, they can vote, but their judicial system, it's ran by theocratic law, by the Holy Book. So that part of it in Iran is different than the other two, Saudi Arabia and United Arab Emirates. Now, let's see what they all mean. Civil law, it's a written, coded law. There is a book. It's all written, the laws with codes. So if anybody has done a violation, they go to court. There is one judge. There is no juries. And the judge will look into the codes. Depending on the violations, they will say the verdict, right? The problem, the common law system said, we have a problem with that. We believe it's very easy to buy one person, which is judge. So you can pay one person, which is judge, and buy and influence their idea to change the law. Change the verdict for you. So therefore, we came up with our idea of 12 juries. So the 12 juries is because of that, because we think it's much more difficult to pay and bribe them and buy them, basically, to change the verdict to your benefits. So therefore, we have 12 juries. The problem here is that we're saying, based on common sense, because those people have never been to law school, most of them, right? So therefore, it's based on common sense. They have to listen to who? To an attorney, right? So the attorney is the person who interprets, who can manipulate, who can interpret whatever the law for them, the scenario and the law for them. And then the 12 juries can, at the end, come up with a verdict, right? The vote. So the problem is that, what if they don't have a very good common sense? So that would really impact the judicial system, right? And the other thing is that we all know that the problem was that originally was, what if we can buy one person, which is the judge? But here, we're legally buying that one person, which is the attorney. We all know how attorney is important in the United States in common law system, because the attorney can actually manipulate and interpret the law for you. We all saw O.J. Simpson. He paid $50 million the first time. I know he ended up finally after many years in jail, but $50 million to get away with it. I personally let me share with you experience that one of my students went through. I had a student, he got married while he was my student, so he took 1 week off. He knew that I would remember him. A couple of years later, about 4 or 5 years later, he called me back. Professor, can I see you on campus? He sent me an email, can I see you on campus? So we met on campus one time. He was a big guy, and he lost like about 100 pounds. I was shocked when I saw him. I'm like, what happened to you? He said, yeah, I've been going through a lot. My wife, and he said, remember you were telling us the story of common law and all that? My wife did something. She ended up in federal prison. But my parents paid $60,000 for the attorney. That was like 10 years ago, I guess. $60,000 for the attorney, and she got 5 years in federal prison. Her accomplice did exactly the same thing, and she didn't have anybody to pay for her. She got 15 years in prison. So 10 years of her life for $60,000, I'm sure that it was well worth it. So, but it's exactly the example of the common law system. There is a huge need for attorneys. And if you don't have money to pay for those top-notch attorneys, you're in a bad shape. So at the end, whether this one or this one, it goes back, I guess, to the money. Who has more money? Then we have theocratic regimes. Theocratic regimes, you have to be very careful. For example, I have seen a lot of Americans get into trouble when they go to United Arab Emirates. Probably they have ideas for Saudi Arabia. They don't do a lot of things. They think, okay, Saudi Arabia. But United Arab Emirates, on the surface, it looks like totally European. But their law is just like Saudi Arabia because they're both going on theocratic system. And a lot of Americans get in trouble there. And you have to understand, it doesn't matter if you're American or wherever you are from, because the jurisdiction is the country you are physically there. So you are at their jurisdiction. They can do whatever they want to because you are there. Your embassy might be able to put some good words for you or anything, but at the end, it's their jurisdiction. So be very careful when you're traveling around the world and understand your jurisdictions and the legal system. It was actually about, I think it was 20 years ago, early 2000s, it was on the news that an American, I don't know if you guys ever heard about that, an American went to Singapore. Singapore is very Europeanized, but, and it's not theocracy, don't get me wrong, but they have harsh regulations. So this guy, in Singapore, you cannot chew gum. It's illegal to chew gum in Singapore. This is something that probably none of us would have even guessed, right? So how would that guy know? Poor thing, they end up in jail finally. He didn't end up in jail. I think he was, he got 100 canes on his feet or something like that, like lashes or something like that, caned. He got caned or something like that. It was. So he was actually chewing gum. He was sitting on the bus stop bench. He was chewing gum and he was playing with it in front of cops. How does he know? Like, honestly, that would be the last thing in my mind, right? That I'm doing something illegal, sitting there and watching them and playing with my gun. So, and then at the end, he took it out and he stuck it in the bench, that's super bad in that culture because it's like, to them, the reason that you don't chew gum, it's because it's dirty and it has germs. And then he did that in front of them, so that's what they took away. So it was on the news everywhere. That's why it's always in my head. I've been to many countries, not Singapore. I'm always afraid I do something that I didn't have any idea it's wrong. Because who would have known that the chewing gum, it's illegal, right? So just be very careful. Again, it's whatever citizenship you have, it doesn't matter. When you leave your jurisdictions, you're in their hand. So then these are the three systems. Now, one thing about intellectual property rights that you have to understand. If you're a business moving to another country, intellectual property right protects three actually areas. One is copyrights, which is your books, your writing, like publications, songs, whatever. The other one is trademark, which protects the symbols of your business. And then the third one is patents, which is for your innovations. If you have any inventions, anything, that patent protects it. But you have to understand, usually only United States, Canada, Japan, and Western European countries, some Northern European countries, they really enforce the law. It doesn't necessarily mean the rest of the world really enforces. They might have it in books somewhere, but it really doesn't necessarily mean it's enforced. So you can go in China and see somebody else has a very, very purse just like yours, but it's completely fake, right? We know that. And they're not going to go after anyone that sells it, probably. About 10-15 years ago, when we had Apple Store here, the first Apple stores here, one of the executives of Apple traveled to China, and he noticed that there is an Apple store in China, which he knew it's not, right? So he goes inside the store and talks to employees there, asking them if you're Apple employee. They all say, yes, we're Apple employees, because they really thought they're Apple employees. They didn't have any idea. And this guy knew that they're not. So he comes back home, and they contact the court system in China and all that. They put pressure. Eventually, they could shut down the business. It was just a Chinese businessman hired people and said, this is Apple store. And people really thought it's Apple store, right? But you and I are not as big as Apple. You understand what I'm saying? It's only Apple that can put pressure and shut down the store. We can't do that. and Chinese government, like the court system, they're not gonna go after our basically complaint if we're filing something. It's just not worth it. It's not enforced as it is here in European Union, for example. So just be careful. Again, you understand your jurisdictions and how law is enforced in those countries. If you hear, like, for example, oh, Apple was protected, that's Apple. It's not you and I. So that's why it was protected. Other than that, most countries around the world, they do not enforce intellectual property rights. So you have to be very careful. Then we have actually Washington Consensus versus Beijing Consensus that we have to talk about in your chapter. Washington Consensus is the ideology that comes from capitalism, which we say Washington, which is the capital of the United States. And it believes that the superiority, the priority should be given to private-owned businesses rather than public-owned businesses, which is good for capitalism, for the growth of economy. This idea was actually established by World Bank and IMF. Did I cover World Bank and IMF in this class? Or I didn't? Because I didn't in my last class. I didn't know. I thought I did in all my classes, but apparently I didn't. Which I'm going to go over that. Are you guys good with the three systems of political, economics, and legal system? Okay. So now let's do the World Bank. So that's the Washington, basically, a consensus, which says, okay, World Bank and IMF say that, the ideology started with that one, private-owned businesses are better for economy than public-owned. Then Beijing comes and says, which they call it Beijing Consensus, says, well, who says that? They question it. Who says that private-owned enterprises are better for economy? Why not public-owned enterprises are better for economy? As a matter of fact, I did have a student. He was an international student from China. And he did actually challenge me one time. He was saying, like, who says that? But if you think about it, now that China is growing really fast, they can challenge you. Because in the past, you could say, numbers show you, right? Like, we're moving so fast and you guys are not. But because China is moving very fast too, now they come and challenge you for that. They're like, who says that? Like, we're moving very fast. So he challenged me about Corona time, which was very interesting. So I really liked it because it's like, it was educational to me too. He said, look how fast we make decisions about Corona. Everybody stay home, everybody put masks, and we basically could control it. Why we have 3 times more population than you guys do have it. But for you guys, because you guys have so much internal fights, one group says that put masks, one group says don't put masks, one group says close the businesses, one group says don't close the businesses. Everybody's confused and you guys cannot move on. So he was saying for us, everybody listens to what government says and we move on.
And they were also beating people up in the street.
China was too. I saw India was. I saw that myself. But I didn't see myself about China, but it is possible. Yeah, absolutely. Did you guys see that they're beating people? Did you guys see videos that they're beating up people? Some countries did. Yeah, some countries did that. So, under Washington Consensus, we said, Washington says the idea of private enterprises was established by World Bank and IMF. In 1945, when World War II ended, couple countries, they came together in Bretton Woods, northeastern United States, in New Hampshire, at a location, and they started forming different organizations. The purpose for these organizations was to prevent any further world war, because within 50 years, less than 50 years, they had 2 world wars, right? World War I and II. So therefore, they wanted to make sure now they have international organizations that each country can send a representative there, and those representatives can discuss civilized. So why get into fights? They started under the Bretton Woods. They started actually a couple organizations. One of the organizations was World Bank. World Bank, what World Bank does, the idea Behind it was to help Japan and Germany, the two defeated countries in the World War II, to basically establish again, to develop again. But Japan and Germany did a very good job. They grew very fast. So World Bank started shifting its focus to other developing nations around the world. The job of World Bank is just exactly the job of any bank. Do you guys know what is the job of banks around the world, in the United States? The job of banks is really only being the intermediary. If you have a lot of money, you put it in the bank, and if I need money, I borrow money in the bank, and I pay for the interest. That's how they make it. So it's just the intermediary. And they invest their extra money too, if they have any surplus. World Bank is doing the same thing too. World Bank basically matches the rich countries with the poor countries and writes the terms of contracts, and okay, you have to lend money to this country with 0 interest rate. Could be 10 years, 0 interest rate. Or no, this country can actually do 5% interest rate, 1% interest rate. So those terms are basically adjusted with World Bank. That's their job. World Bank is actually very big compared to IMF, International Monetary Fund. One of the jobs that World Bank did, for example, was a while back in Africa, they built ovens, brick ovens, safe for kids, because in Africa they used to dig a hole. They dug a hole on the ground to put fire and cook, and kids would fall into those holes and burn. So the job of World Bank was part of it, to get money basically and give it to those sub-Saharan African nations so they can build safe brick ovens for those people. Then we have, one thing. Managing director of World Bank by default must be someone from the United States. IMF, International Monetary Fund, International Monetary Fund was the second organization that was formed. International Monetary Fund, it's actually smaller than World Bank. What it does is that their job basically is the last resort to bail countries in financial troubles out. I'm going to explain what it means. For example, in 2011, Greece was, I don't know if you guys remember, but Greece was in big financial trouble, right? They couldn't pay their dues back to Germany. That's why we say IMF is the last resort, meaning if Greece has financial problems, they can't go directly to IMF and ask to be bailed out for the money. They go to Germany. If they cannot pay their dues to other countries, then, and they're in default, then they can go IMF to come and bail them out. That's what we call them last resorts. You cannot go directly in the beginning. When you start your financial troubles, you can't go directly to IMF. That would be the last resort. Then IMF will come, pay them, and bail you out. But let's see, how does IMF has money to bail you out? IMF has its own actually currency, which is called SDR. It's a French word, but in English we say special drawing unit. I forgot what the R is, but it's a French word. But in English it's special drawing unit. So the special drawing unit is only convertible to United States dollars. Now, how do they have this special drawing unit? Because they have their own, basically, money. How do they have this money? Because each country, just like insurance company that we have to pay premiums, each country has to pay premium to IMF annually. And the larger the country's economy is, the more they pay. Just like if you own a $10 million home, you're probably paying a lot more than I do per year to your house for your home insurance policy, right? So the same thing here. The bigger the country, United States right now pays the highest premium. We pay to IMF annually. They convert it to special drawing unit. Then, if a country needs it, they convert it back to dollar. It's only convertible to dollar, and they pay out to bail them out. That's what their job is. Now, by default, their managing must be from European countries. So this one, American, this one, European. Another organization that was formed under Bretton Woods was United Nations, to be replaced by League of Nations, because League of Nations was already there, but it wasn't really doing anything. It was not successful. So they had United Nations to basically oversee, look for the peace around the world. But we're not going to talk about how successful they are, but that was the initial job, the idea behind it. Then, these are all 1945. Then, in 1947, those countries, they got together again under Bretton Woods, and they added one more organization to it, which in this class, because it's international business class, this is what we're going to deal with all the time. It's called GATT, or GATT, General. So again, we probably will not go over this one a lot. This one, of course, not. This one and this one, probably one chapter, or IMF 2. But this one is, most chapters are about GATT. General Agreement on Tariffs and Trade. General Agreement on Tariffs and Trade. This looks for overseas, basically, the trade around the world. The idea behind it was to encourage countries, member states, to lower the tariff and invest in each other's market. That's very important. So remember we talked about in the first session, I said how globalization happened. Did I go over that in this class? I said how globalization happened, which was, we said, no, probably not. We said collapse of Soviet Union was one of them, international organizations was another one, and technology. I didn't do it in this class, so sorry about that if I didn't. So how did we go here where we are? We got here where we are as far as globalization. There are three main reasons behind it. One is these international organizations, especially GATT, because it actually it's overseeing, encouraging countries, member states, reduce your tariffs, taxations against each other for imported products. Invest in each other's country. The idea is that when you do that, the chances of military intervention is a lot less. So they wanted to do this after World War II. They wanted to reduce the chances of military intervention. So that was the idea behind it. We're going to make countries to be friends with each other, to invest in each other's market, not fight. Because remember, between the end of World War I to the beginning of World War II, do you guys remember the Great Recession of United States, Great Depression of United States, right? In 1930s, you probably have heard about it. That was the time of protectionism. We're not working with any other countries anymore. We don't want to work with anyone else. So protectionism, no imports, no exports, we don't like you. If we have to do import-export, we're going to charge you a very high tariff, okay, to hurt the other economy. So it was based all on a childish, fights. So that's why they said, based on GATT, we're going to remove all those so you guys can easily trade with each other, not putting tariffs. That's why after 75 years, you see where we are right now. You see globalization happening. The other reason is, of course, technology. Technology has removed a lot of barriers, such as communication, telecommunications, transportations. And then the third one, collapse of Soviet Union, because a lot of huge market of the world is joining consumer market. Because at the time of communism, we didn't have probably China as a consumer market, all the 15 former Soviet Union nations, Vietnam. A lot of countries around the world were not participating in this consumerism of the world market. So these are the three main reasons that we see where we are today. Yes?
Can countries invest or trade with closed market?
No. Those closed markets don't like it. Yeah, they don't like it. Very good question. So it's not, whoever is a member state can do it. You see what I'm saying? Now, North Korea can ask to become a member state. Well, we don't have GATT anymore right now. I'm going to explain what happened. You can request to become a member state, but then you have to comply with their policies. If you're not, then they will kick you out. Which, if North Korea, I don't even think North Korea wants to become. You see what I'm saying? So we had GATT until this was 1947, right? Until 1995, which this one was transformed to WTO. This one probably you have heard, World Trade Organization. So if you haven't heard GATT, it's okay because it's not around anymore. One of the reasons that they have transformed GATT to WTO, World Trade Organization, is because GATT didn't have enforcement power. Meaning, if a country, just like as he mentioned, a country is not complying, they didn't know what to do with it. So later they started calling it GATT is General Agreements on Talks and Talks. We're only talking, but we can't do anything. So that's why they wanted to have a enforcement body, like a police body unit within the organization. They established that unit and they called it World Trade Organization. That's why you would see a lot more globalization happening around the world, because they can't enforce it. Again, it's not like they're going to do anything to you, because you have to understand, each sovereign nation's power supersedes any international organization. They can only recommend, and if you want to work with the rest of the world, which is good for your economy, then you listen. That's it. But nobody can force any sovereign nation. So, World Trade Organization right now we have, which is very important for our economy. All the agreements that is happening, for example, NAFTA, regional trade agreements, anything that happens, we go it goes under World Trade Organization. We're going to deal with that a lot. So I'm not going to go over that in details, because in each chapter we have a scenario that we're going to go back again and talk about World Trade Organization. But these are basically the international organizations that were formed under Bretton Woods in 1945 and then 1947. This has been transformed to WTO, which we're going to talk about that a lot. So, but again, the idea was making sure that we can eliminate any wars around the world. Now, let me see if I've missed anything. Can I stop? I think so.
That is a
Oh.